evening. 33 years in 31 days. Welcome along, people who are here. Let's see who's in here. Give time for a few people to drop in. Jenny, good evening. I think, Jenny, you have been on every single broadcast. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you. But welcome along. Andy as well. Good evening. I'm very well, thank you. Good to have you here too. 33 years of policing service in 31 days, and we're on day 21, looking at 2010. I just tweeted out just a few minutes ago that tonight I'm going to touch on well-being, because I think it's important to talk about, my anecdotes, and there's an anecdote in today as well, I suppose. But I think it's also important just to recognise throughout some of this that there's an awful lot of stuff that cops do that is probably not good for them. And so I'm going to sort of go right back to my probation. In fact, I even think I mentioned it where at some point in one of these broadcasts where I mentioned that I'd picked up a road traffic accident file, an RTA file, as we called them then. We've got all this RTC business now, but an RTA file, and I left it because I didn't know what to do with it. And then I can definitely remember an occasion where I went away for the weekend. And I went away for the weekend with some friends, and we stayed at the house of one of my friend's sister and her boyfriend. So we all sort of went down there, crashed out, had food, had beers, all the rest of it. And I slept on the sofa that night because there wasn't enough space, and that was where I was designated to sleep. And I slept on the sofa. And at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, despite the fact that I should be sleeping, I was wide awake. Why was I wide awake? I was wide awake because in the back of my mind, I'm worrying about this road traffic collision file, this road traffic accident file. I don't know what I'm doing with it. What am I going to do with it? Time's getting tight. If I don't do something with it, I'm going to get in trouble. What? The answer was dead obvious. Go and speak to somebody and say, I don't know what I'm doing with this. Can you put me in the right direction? Bit of pride probably got in the way. But I wasn't sleeping. I was worrying and getting anxiety, I suppose, if you like, about the fact that this piece of work was hanging over me like a hammer, and I saw no end to it and didn't know what I was going to do with it. Hanging over me like a hammer. Many times over the years, and I've even blogged on this when I did all my blogging on the custody record years ago, that you would hear some bobbies who would say, I've got loads and loads and loads of paperwork and I just don't get the time to do it. So I've taken some of it home and I've done it at home on my rest days. Wrong. They say if I don't do it, it'll never get done, because as soon as I turn on and prayed on, I just get sent out to jobs and I just keep going job to job to job. And you think, we understand that. But your time off is important to you. It's important for your recovery, your relaxation, your ability. And you can't switch off from everything in the cops, but you can switch off from some of those pressures and demands that it places upon you. But if you start taking work home with you because otherwise it's not going to get done, well, then you create a rod for your own back, because you suddenly at work look far more efficient than what you actually are. And that does a disservice to everybody, because suddenly it's like, well, you can go from job to job to job to job to job and get all your paperwork done. How do you manage that? I'm just brilliant, Sarge. As opposed to, take it all home and do it on my rest days because I live and breathe the job, and I just can't let it go, Sarge. That's no good to anybody. No good to anybody at all, and especially not for their mental health. And so I used to always challenge people and say, don't take paperwork home. If you've not got the time to get it done within your shift and within your working hours, because you're going to have to speak to somebody and say, I've got all this, it needs doing, and it's not going to get done unless you make some time available for me, because I'm not taking it home. Even more so nowadays with modern stuff is that officers have tablets and devices, and how many times I can tell you that I've been sat at work at 3 o'clock in the morning and sent an email to a chief inspector or an inspector or a superintendent or whatever saying, I've got your email, boss, and blah, 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 this, that, and the other. And would it be possible if we could have a look at that because that's bugging me or whatever? 15 minutes later, ping, get a reply from him. How many times I've actually replied back to him and said, very nice of you to reply at this time in the morning, but go to bed. Because there's this sort of, particularly when you start taking devices home, is that there's a temptation to turn it on and look. If you've got a device that belongs to it, it's the dog. Look, I'll turn that the right way. There's Luna. If you've got a device that belongs to work and it's got your work emails on it, and you sat there and you're thinking, I've checked my own phone and I've done my social media and all this, and you think, you know what? There's going to be a load of emails before I go back, so I might as well. I'm going to just, clear them all down and start reading stuff now. And before you know it, you're not just clearing out the junk and the stuff that's not relevant. You're reading something that somebody sent to you because they say, we've got a policy update on how to deal with scenario X, or we've got a new contingency in place for anything that happens at this location. And suddenly you're reading it and you're digesting it and you're trying to get it all in. You think, well, I'll read that now because then I don't have to read it when I get to work. And you think, no. Read it when you get to work. Your time off and away from work is vastly, vastly important to you. So that's where we're at. That's the well-being thing that I'm sort of going to touch on. So let's drop all the way back now from my probation and that little rant. Let's get back to 2010. In 2010, I am still in custody on the right side of the desk, fortunately. So I'm in custody, and 2010 was the year that child number three arrived. And during the WIT half term, my wife was very heavily pregnant, and she wasn't due until August, September. But we thought, you know what, we're going to take the holiday in June, because if we go in June, we'll get the holiday. If we go in the summer holidays, it'll be far too close to baby's arrival. So we took an early holiday. And where did we go? Scilly. If you've ever been to the Scilly Islands, you will know, and the Isles of Scilly, I should say. If you've ever been to the Isles of Scilly, you will know why I have a love affair with the place. If you haven't, well, then don't go, because I'd like to try and keep it to myself. But we went to Scilly, and we had 2 weeks on the islands. Fantastic. Camping. My wife heavily pregnant, but camped. We've got photographs where the girls are playing on the beach, and my wife sat there and she just looks at them now and goes, oh, I look like a beached whale. But here's the thing. We travelled down to Penzance and stayed overnight in a guest house before sailing the following morning. And the interesting thing with Scilly is that we camped, but we always took our trailer tent. So what you do is in the morning, you drive down to the quay with your trailer, you leave your trailer on the quay, and you go and park your car wherever you're going to park it. They crane your trailer onto the boat, put it in the hold. They steam to the Isles of Scilly with you on the boat, preferably. When you get to the other end, the campsite, come down the quay, hook up your trailer to their Land Rover and tow it up to the campsite for you. And as you walk up to the campsite, your trailer goes past you on the way up. It's a great setup, fabulous location. I've not been for a few years and I'm missing it desperately. However, can't think of the process of days, but let's say that it was a Friday that we were driving to Penzance and a Saturday that we were sailing, and I was on nights on the Thursday. So I'm working nights Thursday night into Friday morning. The plan, because there's enough of us on, is to finish at 3 o'clock, get away, have some sleep, and then around about lunchtime, head off to Penzance. Easy. In fact, a bit earlier, actually, thinking about it, it's probably about 10 o'clock heading to Penzance. So that's what we do. So there I am in custody on the Thursday night, gets to, and we'll say that I'm leaving at 2 o'clock, gets to 1 o'clock. Prisoner comes in through the door, big fella, bit tanked up, bit drunk, argumentative, doesn't want to listen to anything I've got to say, doesn't want to listen to the cops, keep thinking he could go pop in and meet this fella and we could have a big scrap on our hands. And for whatever reason, and I don't know why, but for whatever reason, he got under my skin just a little bit. And because he did that, we forgot one important fact. The one important fact was that he hadn't been searched at the desk fully. And we said, you know what? Stick it. We're not making any progress with him. Chuck him in a cell. We'll deal with him when he's sober and wants to try and be polite. So they took him down to the cell. The bobbies chucked him in. And that was that. Now, they didn't say I didn't have a jailer. The jailers were obviously busy doing something else, because the jailers would have gone, wait a minute, Sarge, I haven't searched him yet, because that was their role, that's what they did, and they were switched on. He got under my skin, I had a lapse of concentration or judgment, and the bobbies just went, okay, Sarge, took him to the cell, took his shoes off him, chucked him in. 10 minutes or so later, and I'm still doing the custody record, and I get to the search and the property, and I went, oh, shine a light, I haven't searched him. Go straight down to the cell, thinking, you know, goodness knows what he could find. Hatch down, look in, and he's there, and he says, I've got a load of tablets, puts them in his mouth, and crunches them all up with all, and he's got all white stuff around his teeth and around his mouth and everywhere, and I went, oh my God. There's a similar thing. You almost see a career flash in front of your eyes. You think, one lapse in concentration and this person could potentially overdose here and die. Just don't know what he's taken. It could have been polo mints for all I knew, but he said they were drugs, and you think, got to take it as they are until I know otherwise. I've got to believe that they are, and it's a risk. We tried to negotiate with him. We tried to get him to back away from the cell door. We tried all sorts of stuff to get in there and get him to hand over the tablets and get him to see the nurse, and nothing would happen, and nothing would happen. We eventually had the door open, and we were talking to him, and he'd been a bit aggressive, but then he'd sort of he got up and was by the door and shouting. We're saying, well, you know, just stay in there and all the rest of it, and ready to slam the door shut on him again and all the rest of it. But we need to have those tablets off you. And we're trying to do it the nicely way to avoid any further conflict with him. But time is going on all the time. And he wasn't for giving it up, and was basically, if you come in here, you're all going to have to fight me because I'm going to take you all out. Come on, bring it on. That kind of attitude. And then we're on the verge of giving up and thinking we're going to have to get shields and do a tactic and all the rest of it. And he just happened to turn slightly away from me and towards the mattress that was on the bed just next to him. And the beds are sort of like 6 inches off the floor. Risk-based decision, acted instantly, shoved him. Shoved him straight onto the bed, and it was a huge pile on into a tactic, got it sorted, stripped of all his clothes, stripped of all his property, everything taken from him, all whizzed away, done, door shut, loads of banging and shouting, I'll effing kill you all, you bunch of, and all the stuff that you could imagine and more. So we've got his property, got his clothing. We know that there's nothing in the cell with him now. We know that he can't harm himself, but he hasn't seen the nurse and we've still got that concern. Ring up the inspector, tell him what's happened. Straight cough, missed it. Don't know why. These are the reasons. To cut a long story short, I eventually left custody maybe half an hour, 45 minutes late, having done a big long entry on the custody record about what happened and what I'd done and how we'd intervened and what we'd got from him and da-di-da-di-da and what was happening next and how the nurse was going to do it and how I'd briefed the other sergeants on the risk and what was happening with it and all the rest of it. Did all that, go. The inspector says, it's fine, Neil, get off. I come home, worrying about it all the way home, go to bed, don't sleep brilliantly, but do sleep, get up, sort the family, hook up the get off, I was ready, load everybody into the car, drive to Penzance. All the way to Penzance. Not good for driving at any time, but totally obsessed with what's happened to this fella. Is he all right? Have I got a death in custody? Have I got discipline papers coming my way? What the heck's happening? I ended up somewhere around about Exeter, where we stopped at services, and I stopped and I rang work and said, I need to know what it wasn't my block, obviously, but it was the day shift. And I rang them up and said, I need to know what happened with Jones. What happened with him? Oh, he's gone to court this morning. Was he perfectly all right? Yes. Did he go to hospital? No. He eventually saw the nurse. There was all his vitals and everything were all normal. And we sent him off to court this morning. Right. And he's been all right at court? I don't know. We've not heard anything to the contrary. So we assume yes. Right. Carried on the drive to Penzance. That is a real simple example of how when somebody just pushes the right buttons and gets you under pressure that you can forget sometimes vitally important things. And those things then weigh on your mind. And it's one of those things. I'm just looking at my notes so I don't forget anything. It's one of those things that you just can't switch off from. Now, if you add that to the fact that you're also taking paperwork home and stuff like that, you see it gets even worse. But it's no good for your mental health, and it's certainly no good for your driving, and it's certainly no good for anything else in the relationship with your wife and your children and your family and everybody and your friends or whoever it happens to be. If you're distracted because you're focusing on something that happened at work. As I look back on that now, and I sort of think, what I should have done was got up and made the phone call straight away. I think I was so desperate to want to get away and get on my holiday that I thought, almost in the back of my head, I'm probably thinking, if I ring up now before I've left and they say, oh, right, we were about to ring you, we've got a huge problem, you need to get over here, holiday's just gone out the window. And I suppose in the back of my head I was thinking, if I'm halfway there before I ring, well, then they're not going to turn me around. They bloody well would if they needed to. But anyway, that's a really important thing for me, is the fact that you need to offload that stuff quite quickly in the cops. There are certain things you take home with you. Say, leave the job at the door. You can't leave the job at the door, because you've got people that you're concerned about, victims that you're trying to do your best for, somebody that you've dealt with at a collision that's in hospital in ICU and you don't know whether they're going to go or not, and you're worried about that kind of stuff. There are things like that. But for me, they always came as part and parcel of the job. But when it's something that immediately affects you, your professionalism, whether or not you've cocked up and missed something, and something that's happened as a consequence, those sort of things can stop you from sleeping, can give you indigestion, give you heartburn, your heart palpitations, anxiety, stress. The whole thing all starts to come into play. That was all right, but some people can be affected much more deeply by it than the next. And being able to recognize that within yourself, but also being able to recognize it in your colleagues and say, "You all right? Yeah, I'm fine. No, you're not yourself. Are you really all right? Well, actually, well-being is a huge thing in the cops at the minute, and it was a taboo subject when I joined the cops. You grinned and bared it, you laughed, you went for a pint, and I'm sure many people over the years just fell through the cracks because the support networks and the understanding of what some people were going through and how they could or couldn't cope with certain situations was just not being recognised. Anyway, that was that. We had our holiday. He was fine. Never heard another thing from it. Fortunately, touch wood, that was that. So somebody was looking down on me that night, because I'll hold my hand up. I messed up that night, and I allowed him to get under my skin, which then affected my judgment. And I have to say, it didn't happen again in all the time I was in custody. It happened once, and it never happened again. But it could have happened once, and could have been a death in custody. Could have been the end of my career. Could have been a court case. Could have been anything. Who knows? Because that's the way policing goes. You make decisions and then suddenly find that you're in the big house explaining to the judge what you did and why you did it, and what you didn't do and why you didn't do it. And if the jury come back and say, yeah, well then off you go, young man, and there's a police officer, you will get absolutely battered by the courts in comparison to a member of the public. That was that. Couple all that sort of mental stuff, and along with the stuff I said earlier about taking paperwork home and taking the job home and not being able to switch off, my advice to any cop that's involved, my advice to any cop is, do not ever take work home. If you have a tablet or a device, leave it at the office. Don't bring it home with you, because the temptation is to look at it, and your rest days and your time off are your recovery time, and they're sacrosanct. They are away from work, which is why I used to get so angry and upset when CPS would say, "We need PC Jewson Smith or Sergeant Jewson Smith at court on the 22nd of February. And you say, "Well, it's my rest day." And then, "Well, I don't care." So, "Well, it's my day off. I work a 24/7 shift pattern, and those days off are important to me." And then when you get to court on your rest day, you turn up and the prosecutor says, "I don't know why you're here. You were cancelled days ago." Infuriating. But any of that is no good for your mental health. And I think the most important thing is being able to recognize it within yourself, and also the ability to try and recognize it in those that you work with and around you. That is all for 2010. That was a big thing. As far as pregnancy goes, number 3 arrived, a boy. I always remember one of the inspectors, when we had, here's a bit of personal info. When we did the tests for downs and all that sort of stuff, the numbers were always very low, and they were a big concern to us. But we sort of looked at our lifestyles and everything else and our faith and stuff and said, you know what? No, we're not having the amnio and the risk of miscarriage. We're just going to carry on, and we're going to take what we get, because that's the way that we are. And when we had the blood test for number 3, the numbers were through the roof. And one of the inspectors, she retired not long after, Inspector Rudman, and I was talking to her about it, and she went, it's a boy. And she was bang on right. I mean, she was 50% chance of getting it right anyway, but she said, it's a boy. And lo and behold, it was a boy. And there we go. So called it a day after my son. Yes, definitely. There's a 6-year gap. If you think about it, if you think about the other broadcasts, number 1 was born in 2001. Number 2 was born in 2004. And then there's a 6-year gap to 2010. But it wasn't a mistake or anything like that. Completely and totally planned. And, you know, glad we've had him and got him. And sometimes I could wring his neck, but he's great. But he came along in 2010 as planned, all fine, and I continued my time in custody. And as we move into 2011, something big for my career happens in 2011, and it might be something to do with a social media platform called Twitter. More about that tomorrow. Thank you, those of you that are here. Ruth, Call Me Girl, Jenny, and Andrea. Not sure who else we've got in here, certainly that's commenting anyway. But thank you for dropping in. Nice to have you with us. Hope to see you tomorrow for 2011 on day 22. Until then, have a good evening. Take care. Stay safe. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Good night.